Killing comes easily to those without feelings. A houseguest takes pleasure in the pain of her hosts.
Just a very cold, calculating individual.
A poor immigrant has evil designs on her neighbor's life.
She's able to pull off this unbelievable crime.
Who's that? And a loving mother makes murder a family affair.
Jerry!
They left him for dead in a ditch.
These deadly women kill without conscience. In the heat of the moment, they are ice cold. Hattiesburg, Mississippi, 2004.
They're here!
After years apart, a family reunion. 29-year-old Roger Gillette
Howdy, cousin. Good to see you.
is catching up with his cousin, Vernon Hollett.
Good to see you too.
They grew up together. They knew each other well, so they were very comfortable with each other. He was glad to see his cousin, but he wasn't expecting Lisa Joe.
This is Linda.
Hi, lovely to meet you both.
This is Lisa.
Hi.
31-year-old Lisa Joe Chamberlain is Roger's new flame.
Now, Linda, I hope you don't mind us staying.
Your family.
Vernon's also in love with 37-year-old Linda Heinzelman.
Linda was a sweet, unassuming, simple, young woman. She liked to keep house and be with Vernon.
No. Well, family means the world to us, too.
They were living kind of a quiet life. He had taken a job with the city of Hattiesburg. They, by all accounts, were a happy couple.
But Vernon and Linda have no idea who they are letting stay in their home.
Excuse me?
Lisa was very jealous of any women that were around and was very pushy about Linda.
Joe's one skill is cooking methamphetamine.
She would make it, he would sell it. He was a salesman type guy, very polished as a con man, and they just seemed to hit it off.
Roger would get into trouble, not take responsibility, and relatives would bail him out of trouble. What they didn't realize is that every time they bailed him out of a problem, they bought him his next criminal act.
Hey, baby.
Another criminal act is the real reason behind the family reunion. Lisa Joe and Roger are on the run from drug charges in Kansas City.
He was planning on staying for a few days, get some money from Vernon, and then he and Lisa Joe would go on to Mexico.
In a bid for quick cash, they entice cousin Vernon into helping with an insurance scam.
I don't know.
What's the problem? The only loser is the insurance company.
Screw them, right?
And they were going to basically stage a vehicle accident with Lisa's car and Linda's pickup.
Linda will never go for it.
Look, once we stage the accident, she won't have any choice.
Linda was not going to cooperate with them claiming an insurance scam on her insurance.
No way. I'm not doing this.
She didn't like living that style. She liked doing things honest.
Linda, it's easy.
I said no.
Well, what about my car? I can't even drive it.
I'm sorry.
Lisa Joe is not the kind of person that rolls with the punches.
So much for being nice.
She's going to be looking for people to blame. And she's not going to find her in the mirror.
Lisa was the driving force and kind of came up with a lot of the ideas of what they were going to do.
She comes up with an even darker plan to make money.
Hey, Vernon, I've been thinking. How would you like to be a partner in a small business?
Lisa and Roger were bad to the bone.
You mean the meth business?
Why not?
Vernon didn't want any part of it.
He wanted to move forward and be productive and start a family.
I think it's time you both left.
They're used to always getting what they wanted.
Something was going to happen, and something did.
By March 20th, 2004, Vernon has had enough of Lisa Joe and Roger. But they're not prepared to leave empty-handed.
What are you doing?
A couple of beers to the road.
Put it back.
They resorted to what they knew best, being evil and mean.
That is it. Get out of my house.
Oh, we're leaving, all right. But not without your pickup and the money.
Lisa Joe and Roger truly were a match made in hell.
What money?
The money in the safe.
There's no money in there.
Lisa Joe felt that there was money in that safe, that he was keeping money there, and they wanted that money.
They are prepared to do whatever it takes to get the combination.
It turned into just an actual fury of blind rage. The stabbing, the slashing, that brutal assault.
And it just kept getting worse and worse. Linda was watching the man that she loved getting tortured.
Give us the combination!
Vernon.
They finally hit Vernon in the head with a hammer.
You could have made this easy on yourself, couldn't you?
It actually bit the metal handle of the hammer.
So it was a house of horrors, if you will, for a few hours.
It's not that difficult to kill someone,
Finish him off.
but that isn't what Lisa Joe and Roger wanted. They wanted to party, and partying to them meant hurting other people. Torture.
No. Please.
That cut his throat, and he bled out.
But they still don't have what they want.
The combination! Give it to us!
Give it to us now!
I don't know what it is! We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way!
She didn't like Linda from the beginning, and so for her to be able to torture Linda like that was satisfying to her.
I promise I don't want you please to... No!
Roger and Lisa sexually assaulted her. That turned on Lisa so much she wanted to have sex with Roger. And so they did. And Lisa said it was the best sexual experience of her life. That's really all I need to know about Lisa.
They decided to clean the home and dismember the bodies. Roger was taking too long, so she moved him out of the way and said, "Look, I've deer hunted. I know how to dismember this body." So she took over the operation and finished dismembering the body.
They emptied out a chest freezer and put both bodies in the chest freezer.
Shut it, plugged it in, and they were froze.
Lisa, Joe, and Roger now break open the safe. But there is no pot of gold.
There was no money in the safe, so this whole robbery and homicide was really for nothing.
The killers load their gruesome cargo onto Cousin Vernon's pickup and drive it 1,000 miles to a farm in Russell County, Kansas, owned by another of Roger's relatives.
He felt that he could hide back here and get rid of the bodies.
This time, on the run from the law with a mystery freezer on board.
Hey!
Rogers outlasted his welcome.
What are you doing?
Some of the family actually turned on Roger and gave him up.
These two should be the poster kids for "This is your brain on drugs." They could have easily gotten rid of that freezer and sunk it in a lake. But no, they're carrying it around with them and talking about the bodies in the freezer.
Within days, the House of Horrors is revealed.
To have a crime this violent, remember, it does send a shock to the community.
Through the entire time, I never once saw an ounce of remorse. She did not seem to be fazed by her actions at all, and just a very cold, calculating individual.
In 2006, Lisa Joe Chamberlain and Roger Gillette are convicted of 2 counts of capital murder. They are both sentenced to death.
The deliberate torture, murder, sexual assault of 2 people is indefensible. And the people that are able to do it, or the person able to do it, should never walk among us.
In 2014, Roger's death sentence is overturned. He is resentenced to life in prison. No chance of parole.
What tipped Roger and Lisa, I don't think it had to do so much with trying to obtain something. I think that was the initial motive. But once that the violence started, that they just got into it. Lisa Joe, in my opinion, enjoyed what she was doing.
They say Satan is always looking for new souls. But I think when these two show up in hell, they're getting kicked right back out. Jealousy is one of the most common motives behind murder.
Cheers.
She just took what she wanted. And if someone had to die, oh well.
At the turn of the 20th century, like millions of her countrymen, Irish lass Mary Farmer immigrates to America in search of a better life.
She suffered a lot of hardship, I think, in her life, and coming to America was going to be that fresh start, that new beginning.
By 1907, 24-year-old Mary's life is looking up. She's married with a young son, with big dreams for their future in Jefferson County, New York.
Now she had this young son,
Don't worry, me love. You'll have better than this.
and she did not want this young son growing up to be an impoverished person.
But just when life is looking bright, Mary's luck runs out. Husband James
For milk. And he was rather fond of drink.
You're drunk.
I've been dismissed.
No. No, not now. Not with the baby.
Her husband lost his job and crawled into a bottle.
With James out of work, things were going to go to desperate pretty quickly.
Sarah. Is it rent day already?
Their neighbor and landlord, Sarah Brennan, is a successful Irish immigrant.
I heard about your husband. If you need more time. Of course not. I'll get it for you.
Sarah Brennan, she's snobbish, she's arrogant, she talks down to Mrs. Farmer.
Maybe lord it over Mary just a little bit. Just letting her know, our life is a little better than yours.
It won't leave you short?
There was a definite class distinction. Sarah didn't really visit Mary in her home.
Why don't you come in? Oh, I can't. Why don't you come for tea this afternoon?
Mary visited Sarah.
The visits only remind Mary of all the things she doesn't have.
Fancy.
Their house was very, very nice. All the modern luxuries at the time. They had a lot, and it was apparent.
It was my mother's.
She's very, very, very jealous of everything that Sarah had.
You have such nice things. You will too. One day.
She was doing a little bit more than sipping tea with Sarah. She was looking around and seeing where things were.
Let me show you something.
And she was able to find out where they kept their important papers.
Mrs. Brennan enjoyed her money and she enjoyed flouting her money.
This is something I'm very proud of. We finally own our home. That's my dream.
Fate has placed a golden opportunity right in front of Mary. And an audacious plan.
Mary went into the house and stole those papers, including the deed to the property.
Armed with the stolen deed, Mary embarks on a daring deception.
Mary, even though she wasn't educated at all, came up with a kind of a sophisticated plan.
Mrs. Brennan? That's right. Sarah Brennan.
Mary went into the county records office pretending to be Sarah.
And you want to transfer ownership of the property deed? Yes, we've sold the house to the lovely couple next door.
She had the attorney transfer title from Mrs. Brennan to herself.
Mary and James Farmer.
Small towns, usually everybody knows everybody else's business. Yet Mary comes in, she's an outsider, and she's able to pull off this unbelievable crime.
We need a signature then.
She forges Sarah's name and has it notarized. So now she's the proud owner of 2 properties, completely illegally.
So now the issue is, how do they get the Brennans out of the house?
In 1907, struggling Irish immigrants, Mary and James Farmer,
Open it.
finally have something to celebrate.
But this says...
We own the house next door?
Mary told her husband that she bought the big house from Sarah.
The Brennan's place, but how?
My uncle in Buffalo left me some money.
Where did you get the money? Well, I got the money from an uncle in Buffalo.
Did something happen to your uncle?
Oh yes, he was very sick. And he died, and that's your name and my name on there.
Yes, I
Yeah.
can see.
James is stunned by their change of fortune.
And he's really not going to look any harder at it than that. I mean, this is a windfall.
I kept my promise to our son. He'll never have to worry about a thing.
Then this calls for an ale.
All right, then.
But as the farmers celebrate, if the real Sarah Brennan discovers the deed to the home is missing, Mary's thieving ways will be exposed.
That was the dilemma, because Sarah was not stupid.
Obviously, Sarah and Patrick weren't going to give Mary the house. Mary knew that.
On April 23rd, 1908, she sets out to solve the problem.
She tells Sarah she'll accompany her to the dentist.
I'm off. Where's the bub?
I told you. Mrs. Baker's looking after him today. I'm going into town with Sarah.
James went to help a relative pave a walkway. The baby, Peter, is with the sitter. So that leaves Mary and Sarah on this errand to the dentist.
It's an appointment Sarah Brennan will not keep.
Mary has a surprise for her.
Do hurry up, Mary.
Mary came up behind her and...
I'll be late for the dentist.
she hit her over the head with an axe.
She just takes that hatchet and she starts hitting Sarah over and over with it. She's just raining blow after blow on Sarah, and there's a lot of pent-up rage.
In killing Sarah, Mary was ferociously destroying what she coveted. Mary put that axe right between Sarah's eyes. She hated her.
Sarah suffers a horrific death because Mary wants her lifestyle.
It was a very extreme act. And I think Mary Farmer wanted it to be a very extreme act. She didn't like that woman. She didn't like Mrs. Brennan.
There, damn you. I've done with you.
And said, there, I'm done with you.
Mary bundles Sarah's body into a large trunk and scrubs away all evidence of the murder before husband James returns. When Sarah's husband Patrick arrives home, he's locked out and there is no sign of his wife.
Patrick looks for the spare key, doesn't find the spare key in the regular hiding place.
The farmers arrive with a bizarre explanation.
What do you think you're doing?
To us.
Mary Farmer says, well, we bought the house and your wife's been paying us $2 a week rent.
Very funny.
That was news to him.
The paperwork to prove it. And you're 2 weeks behind on rent. You, sir, are evicted.
Of course, Patrick was dumbstruck.
Once Mary and James successfully got Patrick evicted from his own house, they move in.
But just weeks later, Mary's devious plot begins to unravel. Patrick orders his own investigation into his wife's disappearance, starting at the county records office.
Patrick retains an attorney to look into it. What he finds out was the woman that did the trade on the title did not look like Sarah. In fact, it was a description of Mary.
And that's when people start to get suspicious. Like, okay, I wonder where Sarah really is and what happened to her.
Armed with new evidence, the local sheriff searches the farmer's new home.
Sheriff Bellinger is called in. He begins to investigate. He goes to the farmers.
What about these?
Bellinger asked about the trunks, the smaller one and the larger one.
The top one's mine, and the other must be yours.
Mary Farmer said that the smaller trunk was hers and that the larger trunk was Mr. Farmer's.
That's a damn lie.
And James is right away, oh no, it's not. That big one on the bottom leaking fluids, that's your trunk.
Naive James doesn't think they have anything to hide.
Yes, well, I suppose the big one's mine, but I've lost the key.
Let's just let the sheriff bust it open then.
James told the police to break it open. The search for Sarah was over. The fact that James insisted the trunk be broken open indicates he had no knowledge that there was a body in the trunk and what his wife had done.
But in 1908, both Mary and James Farmer are convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by electric chair.
While she's waiting to be executed, Mrs. Farmer wrote a letter claiming that her husband, James Farmer, had nothing to do with the murder of Sarah Brennan.
But thanks to her letter, James is acquitted on appeal and walks free. But he's never reunited with their son, Peter.
And that's the saddest part of this case. When Mary and James were arrested, their little boy went to the home of a relative, but eventually ended up in an orphanage.
She had set this whole plan in motion, supposedly to spare her son any kind of a hard life, and he just got the worst outcome possible.
She actually destroyed his life.
Mary Farmer begrudged the success of others so much, she tried to take it for herself and condemned her family to a fate far worse than the poverty she wanted to escape.
Mary Farmer is a product of her environment. She's a product of the time. She could look at this other woman and say, "You've got something that I want and I'm going to take it because it's the only way I can get it."
A lot of people aren't happy with what they have in life, but they don't go killing people that do have what they want. Mary's desire to live in that big house became a very, very powerful fantasy, and their life just became out of control, and this is how it ended. She had no trouble pushing people around. It was a brutal, hands-on attack, which was kind of a dream come true.
In 2015, the countryside of South Yorkshire, England, is usually a peaceful place.
Here you are, love. Take a break.
But when new landowners, 39-year-old Scott Dawson and his 69-year-old mother Carol arrive, things start to change.
Carol and Scott inherited some money, and with this money, they bought quite a large plot of land.
Who's that?
There was a popular walking trail that went through the land. The path was actually public. The public were entitled to use it. And because of the nature of the way the place was, sometimes people would actually stray from the path, which would mean that technically they were trespassing on the Dawson's land.
Ah, jeez. I'm sick of this. Hey!
There was no doubt that in the majority of cases, these people didn't even realise that
Carol and Scott are unforgiving.
You're trespassing.
This is a public path.
Not here, it isn't.
They don't like to share.
Carol Dawson seemed like an unassuming pensioner. She was anything but.
Well, I'm looking for me dog.
Her son, Scott,
Get.
was Carol on steroids.
Right.
Scott was always itching for a fight. It seems to me he was trying to prove himself. That he was the king of his domain and everybody else needed to toe the line.
Close by, but a world away. Neighbors 46-year-old Gary Dean and wife Carolyn are more congenial.
Gary was not an aggressive man in any way, shape or form. He would do everything he could to avoid confrontation.
Most people describe Gary as being extremely kind and that he wouldn't hurt a fly.
Having breakfast this morning?
No time. I've got a meeting about it.
Come on, you always get in.
But Gary's passion means two different worlds inevitably collide.
Don't get to a staff meeting.
What, give us a kiss then?
Ah, too sweaty, get away from me.
Oh, come on, you love it.
Eat something.
He was an avid and obsessive runner. He'd even completed 21 consecutive London marathons.
Gary had a daily routine, and he used to run on the popular walking trail, which was public, but there's no doubt that part of his route would often perhaps take him onto the Dawson's land as well.
Around 2016, Scott and his mother Carol began to get very annoyed with Gary.
What's the problem? You're trespassing. It's a public path. Path's over there.
Okay. Happy now?
The more that he did this, the more furious the Dawsons, mother and son, became.
Over time, the scenario plays out again and again. For Scott and Carol, interrupting Gary's run becomes an obsession.
They put signs up with the words "stay away" on in the land directed towards Gary Dean. They wanted their own land and they didn't want anybody else to be anywhere near it.
But it didn't do any good.
The mother and son declare war.
In 2017, Carol began making accusations directly to the police about Gary. He was accused of setting fires and even dumping rubbish on their land.
It's Carol Dawson again. You have to do something.
And they even suggested at one point that Gary Dean had been defecating in the area as well.
I don't care. This is the 5th time I've called you this week.
Scott and Carol would not stop.
You need to send somebody over, okay?
Carol was trying to make herself out to be the victim when in fact, the problem was Carol and her son.
Lying to the police gets her nowhere. But Carol is willing to try anything in her arsenal to fight Gary, so she ups her smear campaign.
Gary's wife was a headmistress in a local primary school, and one day she received an anonymous letter that had been delivered to the school. A similar letter was also delivered to the dean's home address as well. That letter contained awful rumours and suggestions.
I was so wrong.
Basically trying to stoke up a bit of unrest within the community.
The author of the letters, Carol knows one lie that sticks like mud.
Carol began circulating rumours that Gary was a paedophile who lured little children into the woodlands around the park. Caroline was a schoolteacher. Sadly for Caroline, local authorities were obliged to investigate these allegations.
Gary! Where's he going to stop?
An investigation clears Gary's name.
It pushed Carol and Scott over the top. They commenced a plan that would result in someone's death.
On September 6, 2018, in the beautiful countryside of South Yorkshire, England, Carol and her son Scott embark on an ugly vendetta.
Carol had tremendous control and influence over her adult son, Scott.
This morning is like any other, except instead of a run, Gary decides to walk his usual route.
When Gary left the home address at about 7 o'clock in the morning, he was dressed fairly casually. He wasn't wearing his running gear.
As Gary made his way along the public path, Scott and Carol were waiting on their land.
He was ambushed. He never had a chance.
First, he shot him in the back with an air rifle, and that's when things turned really violent.
He was pursued relentlessly by Scott Dawson, who then began to beat him very savagely with the butt of the rifle, with some rocks.
Use that rock.
It was a brutal, hands-on attack, which was kind of a dream come true for Scott, beating someone up in the woods. Gary never had a chance.
They left him for dead in the ditch.
Gary is guilty of nothing other than a healthy dedication to exercise. Yet his punishment, cruel slander, and a brutal death.
Gary Dean, who hadn't caused any harm to anybody and was going about his usual business, had his life tragically cut short by a pair of manipulative, aggressive individuals.
Their plan was to return later that day with a digger to dispose of the body.
Before they get the chance, passers-by come across the blood-soaked murder scene. Immediately, investigators have prime suspects.
The police had hundreds of complaints from Scott and his mother regarding the murder victim. Gee, I wonder who did this crime.
That your writing?
I've never seen it before.
The police quickly began to sift through clear evidence of the feud that existed between them.
I've got nothing else to say.
Their handwriting expert was able to determine that it was Carol that wrote the graffiti.
Where's the gun?
I sold it weeks ago.
Really? Sold the gun, but you kept the silencer?
In 2019, both Scott and Carol Dawson are convicted of murder. Scott is sentenced to a minimum of 31 years. Carol receives 26 years.
The judge had some pretty harsh comments to make. He said that you both fed off the venom of each other. This toxic mixture led to murder.
Carol and Scott shared an anger at the world that festered into murderous rage. Gary literally stumbled into their path.
Carol and Scott are a study in a family conspiracy. Scott would do anything his mother wanted. Carol enabled her own son to commit an act that resulted in him going to prison pretty much for the rest of his life. What kind of mother is that?
For these deadly women, cruelty came naturally. Lisa Jo Chamberlain brought terror to a contented home. Mary Farmer traded her neighbor's death for a better life. And Carol Dawson's hateful vendetta ended in an assassination. All three women were made for murder. They killed without conscience. They were ice cold.